Xiao was one of my first DPS characters and has always been one of my favorites. He started off strong when he was first released, but was considered by many to have been left behind the meta over time, and he's often overlooked. I played with him anyway, even in the Abyss. With the release of Xianyun and Faruzan before her, Hoyo finally gave us some characters who truly fit his playstyle. But was he really left behind in the first place? How does he compare now? And what if you don't have his ideal team? My early experience with Xiao took a long while to get past. It was pretty traumatic. He was one of the first 5-star characters I got to play with, since his story quest was one of the first I played when I started Genshin in 2021. I vividly remember how fun and different his gameplay felt. He lets you zoom around the battle like an angry grasshopper, which was a stark contrast to all the other characters in the game at the time. His design is wonderful, and I was sold on his character right from the start. Unlike many others, he's much more reserved at first, and it takes a little while before he opens up to the traveler. I loved this about him, and his slightly angsty, no-nonsense, straight-talking personality really struck a chord for me. And once you get past the surface level, his backstory is downright heartbreaking. Xiao is a yaksha, an illuminated beast who has lived for thousands of years. He spent much of that time enslaved by an ancient god, forced to perform cruel and violent acts against his will for centuries. During the Archon War, another god called Morax, better known as Zhongli, defeated the ancient god and freed the yakshas. Xiao is forever loyal to Zhongli as a result, and has made protecting Liyue from all evil his guiding duty. However, his past has a lasting impact on him through karmic debt, which plagues him with constant physical and mental pain. He's the last of his kind to remain. All of his friends who survived the wars have either succumbed to their trauma or disappeared without a trace, and he will spend the rest of his life fighting against the lingering influence of his former masters, because even defeated gods are immortal. Their consciousness diminishes, but their power and hatred will forever remain. Xiao's war can never be won, and he is fated to fight it forevermore. He spends his time alone, in fear of spreading the corrosive power of his karmic debt, but something about the traveler broke past this shell, and they became his first true friend in centuries. His story feels like a harrowing depiction of PTSD and chronic illness, and I love that the traveler brought a little light into the darkness. His battle with guilt, regrets, and never-ending feeling of failure is one I empathize with a little too well. He'll always be one of my favorite characters in the game. Though I do have to be careful not to leave him on field during stream when I go on my be right back scream. So Xiao has a dark past, but his story wasn't actually the traumatic experience I mentioned earlier. I was determined to get him, and as a Welkin and BP only player, making my way through the existing content, I was able to save up a fair few wishes. By the time his banner came around in version 2.4, I was ready. I had enough to guarantee that I'd get him, even if I lost my 50-50. My wishes went just as badly as usual, and I passed 80 pity before it turned gold. And of course, I lost my 50-50. I took a break from wishing to reconsider. When you're not a whale, it's good to be cautious about spending too much on one banner, and it's a better idea to aim for universal supports than it is to get a DPS, especially a selfish hypercarry like Xiao. I did want a lot of other characters, but Xiao called to me. I took it slowly, pausing every now and then to kill some hilly churls and decide whether I really wanted to keep going. Eventually, at soft pity, it went gold. I was so excited. And a wild Shenhe appeared! You see, back then double banners were new, and the wishing page didn't remember which banner you had previously viewed. In my rush to do another 10 pull, I hadn't noticed that I wished on the wrong one. I was devastated. Few Primogens left, not much content to play through, and a track record of losing every 50-50 at well past soft pity. I had little hope of getting Xiao. I scoured the world for as many wishes as I could manage, did all the quests and events, everything I could think of, and I lost another 50-50. I gave up completely. And then my sneaky partner sneakily sneaked into my account and bought Genesis crystals. Xiao still took me to soft pity once more, but finally, after far too much anguish, he was mine. Before we look at how his teams have evolved over time, let's quickly review his kit and how best to build him. He's an Anemo Spear user with fast and dynamic normal attacks which are very satisfying to use. His skill is a dash attack which can be cast multiple times, including in mid-air, which can even be useful outside of combat on an occasion. His burst is his main purpose though. He puts on the mask of the Yaksha and gains several abilities. His attacks become infused with Anemo, his jumping ability is increased in both height and movement speed, he gains interruption resistance, and his plunge attacks have their AoE increased. As a trade-off, his health continuously drains away unless he's actively damaging enemies, and his skill no longer generates elemental particles. These abilities do not persist if you switch away, so he's very much a selfish hypercarry main DPS who works best with a team designed to pour as much power into his attacks and keep him on field as much as possible. His inability to generate particles in this state is a key weakness. With a 70 cost burst, he does need a decent amount of energy, and this quirk means he requires conscious management to ensure he can use his burst consistently, though as we'll see later, certain characters definitely help mitigate this. Since he was one of my earliest 5 stars, his build has evolved several times as I got better pieces. I got his signature Jade Wing Spear from the standard banner before I even pulled him, so he has had his ideal weapon since day one. He does have alternatives. Any 5-star DPS spear would be fantastic for him, and he has great 4-star options which are viable, and if you're fully free to play, you might want to save your star glitter for the Blackcliff Spear from Paimon's shop. If all else fails, a white tassel can work, but due to its super low base attack, it's definitely not ideal. He generally wants an attack sense, an Anemo damage or attack goblet, and a crit circlet, with ideally at least 20 to 40% ER from substats depending on your teammates. His ideal mix of attack and Anemo damage changes depending on the team he's in, though the difference you'll see when comparing similar investment weighted towards different stats tends to be fairly small. He can make use of a wide variety of 2-piece and 4-piece sets. His favoured full sets are Vermilion or Marechaussee, though he can make use of Desert Pavilion with a slightly more complicated attack pattern. My Xiao has always been on mixed 2-piece sets. He's currently on 2-piece Anemo damage sets but with an attack goblet. His pieces could certainly do with an upgrade, but it is and always will be a fairly low priority project for me. Despite that, he has a fairly solid 2.4k attack with 82 to 189 crit ratio. I've tried shifting to different sets and found, as always, that the set bonus is less important than the substats. And of course, to reach the same substat strength with any 4-piece set would take a ton of investment, which just is not worth it for me. Despite his not so perfect build, I've always been more or less happy with him. So, he's best used as a hypercarry main DPS, with the rest of the team built around him, and he's even more restrictive than most similar characters due to his element. Let's look at his teams, how they've changed, and how their strength compares. For the first year or so after getting him, the Xiao team which I found most comfortable was double Anemo, double Geo, with Jean, Zhongli, and Albedo. This team is pretty great. Jean provides healing and consistent Anemo particles, Zhongli provides a tanky shield and resistance shred, and Albedo provides solid off-field damage. Geo Resonance is also a nice bonus, providing extra damage, boosting shield strength, and shredding Geo resistance. This was one of my main Abyss teams for a long while. I did occasionally swap in Bennett instead of Albedo, but it was pretty stable. It still does fairly decent damage against the right enemies, shreds shields with surprising speed, and is far more obscure than it deserves. I admittedly was not one to follow meta, but apparently this team was known as Xiao's strongest available at the time. He was highly rated when he was first released since he had several advantages: high multipliers, a large AoE on his attacks, the fact that his plunge attacks are surprisingly effective at breaking shields, and so on. However, by the time I got him, his reputation had been steadily trending downwards. Anemo's Swirl reaction provides fantastic utility for support characters, but offers little value for a main DPS. Its effect does not boost Xiao's damage, so his teams focus entirely on increasing his raw strength and ignore reactions completely. This is a common theme for Hazo and Wanderer too, who also fall into the same role. As the community discovered the power of reaction-focused DPS characters, this was perceived by many to be a downside to Xiao, and is a big factor in his popularity falling over time. This is a valid point to some extent. His damage ceiling ended up being much lower than others, such as Hu Tao, since he didn't benefit from the characters who were added in versions 1 and 2 in the same way. At the same time, the Abyss lineups are always changing, which constantly shifts the meta. And since he's such a niche character, it was rare for the enemies to be particularly well suited to his strengths. But he was still strong enough to beat the Abyss, the only recurring content in the game which is ever considered at all difficult. This is a point of perspective in the Genshin community at large which I've always struggled to grasp. A vocal segment are highly interested in the meta and spend their time chasing anything which makes their characters more powerful, discarding any who don't keep up with the biggest numbers. Meanwhile, I don't really care. For me, if a character can 36-star the Abyss, then they're strong enough. Anything beyond that is at best a bit of an overkill, and at worst an active detriment to my enjoyment of the game. Characters who are too powerful can end up removing what little challenge there is left, and I'll always prefer a difficult fight which requires you to concentrate or you'll only just scrape by, to one where it feels like the moment I even look at the enemies, they'll just disappear. Xiao's damage output didn't keep up with the meta, but he could still clear the Abyss. I liked him, I enjoyed his playstyle, so I used him anyway. However, over time I did end up using him less and less, though it was mostly because I kept getting new characters who were all really fun to play, and he just didn't really have any synergy with any of them. I enjoyed Xiao when I felt like playing him, and he was strong enough, but the shiny new things tend to be more enticing. Then, almost a year later, in version 3.3, Genshin finally released Faruzan. As the game's first support dedicated to buffing animal damage, she immediately became Xiao's best in slot. The general consensus was that she did a good job of improving his damage output, especially at C6, but not quite enough to bring him back to the top. This patch also brought new competition in the form of Wanderer, though I had zero interest in him and skipped the banner completely, missing out on a Faruzan as a result. However, I got lucky for once and Faruzan jumped at me from the standard banner in the next patch. I also got her C1 from the Parade of Providence in 3.6. As I explained in my Faruzan video, she's criminally underrated at low constellations, and I quickly integrated her into my much improved team for Xiao. His new team was with Faruzan, Kokomi and Layla. Kokomi provides solid healing along with an attack buff from the Thrilling Tales Catalyst, and Layla provides a hefty shield plus another attack buff from the Millilith set, while Faruzan provides a ton of animal damage bonus and resistance shred. In this team, he did noticeably more damage than in the double Geo team, and it was also more comfortable due to the enemies being frozen occasionally. The next big change to my Xiao team came with the release of Furina in 4.2. Furina's buff is ridiculously powerful and changed the game for a whole host of characters, instantly taking over the role of best support for many teams. She's great for Xiao, especially since she turns his health drain mechanic into a positive since it can contribute to her fanfare stacks. I used her in a ton of different teams, but was particularly excited to tweak my Xiao team to fit her in. I kept Faruzan for her huge buff, removed Kokomi and Layla, and brought back Jean to go with Furina. While Furina and Kokomi can work together, it's underwhelming if you don't use Kokomi on field during her burst, so it doesn't mesh well with Xiao. In contrast, Jean provides team-wide healing in a flash, which is perfect for Furina, and her animal particles were still very welcome. This variation was short-lived, however, as my Xiao team reached what will probably be its final form in version 4.4. Xianyun is an absolutely perfect fit. She's a support who buffs plunge attacks, generates a decent amount of animal particles, and also provides team-wide healing, which is tailored to maxing out Furina's buff. On this banner, I also got C6 Faruzan, which turned out to be a nice boost to how comfortable she is without being much of a game changer, aside from fully solving any lingering energy problems for Xiao. So my latest Xiao team is with him, Faruzan, Furina and Xianyun, and I absolutely love it. The team feels fantastic. It's easily one of the most fun to play due to its fantastic mobility, and the buffs combine perfectly to give great damage output. Xianyun's single target buff even helps mitigate Xiao's slight weakness against single target situations. The team's only real downside is the lack of a shield, so you have to be a little more careful, but its sheer strength more than makes up for it. He's still not quite able to catch up to characters such as Novelette or Alhaitham, but at least it's pretty close. If you lack one or more of those ideal characters, the team will be a little less powerful, but it's still more than strong enough if you play him right. And no, you don't need a C6 Faruzan for him either, though at least a C0 copy is definitely a huge bonus. If you don't have any of those characters at all, then it's definitely a tougher task to keep him performing well enough to pass the bar of beating the Abyss. You might have to experiment with some unusual combinations. For example, if you ignore his plunge attacks completely, you could bring in Yunjin, focus on his normal attacks instead, and still do a decent enough damage. However, his energy problems are definitely more noticeable in these setups, and it's nowhere near as satisfying to play. Overall, Xiao is a DPS who requires a fairly high level of investment to fully keep up with harder content, so he's one of those characters you get because you love them and want to invest in them. If you're struggling with the Abyss, then there are other characters who may make more of a difference, but generally speaking, I recommend pulling for characters based on how much you like them rather than their raw strength. Just ask yourself whether an extra 50 or 100 Primogems every few weeks is really that important. And of course, outside of the Abyss, none of this matters anyway. If you want to pull for him, don't let that hold you back. I never did, and I have no regrets. Until next time!